Welcome back to Drawing One, everybody. So for this vocab video, we're going to be talking about value. And in this sense, value refers to the relative lightness or darkness of our object. So we can perceive value as a relationship and, from light to dark and how those two can be perceived once or, against one another and everything like that. But we can also talk about a variety of ways in which we can create value within a drawing as well. So one way that we can do that would be through hatching. All right, and hatching refers to when parallel lines are used to suggest shadow and volume. So once again, if we have a basic, kind of three-dimensional shape, we would use parallel lines to create a sense of shadow. So in this case, our light source would be coming from kind of over here. So once again, hatching is when we use just parallel lines. And so this is probably the best example. But in addition to this, we can use hatching in a variety of ways as well. So we can create a scale, a value scale out of it. So let's say we have a scale of hatching. Well, here we've got the white of our picture plane. And then we can create hatching. To create a value scale. And once again, we can see that by layering these lines up closer and closer, more and more of them, we go from a basic white to black value scale. So once again, the idea of hatching is parallel lines. And we want to mask them up, okay? Now this is opposed to, say, cross hatching. And this is when parallel lines that follow the contour of an outline, layering parallel lines at varying angles to create deeper shadows and heavier volume. So once again, it's very much like hatching in that we're going to create these parallel lines However, we're going to vary their angles up. And once again, we're going to stay parallel, but we're going to cross them at various angles. And so now we have three basic, kind of value ranges. So we have a kind of white, a gray, and a dark, all right? And once again, our light source would be coming from kind of over here. But, this is interesting in that we don't necessarily only have to do this once. We can also come back in and just keep doing it over and over and over and over and over and over again. And once again, this isn't the best example, and obviously this works a lot better with pencil than it does with a marker on the eraser board here. But you get the basic ideas that, we can keep layering these lines up at varying angles to really increase the depth of our shadow. And so this is something that as you go, you really want to do, kind of more and more selectively. So, that we get just these tiny areas where everything's really deep and these areas where, things are lighter. So once again, we might have a value scale. but we can also start to go more extremely. And once again, you can see I'm kind of varying up my shapes or my lines here, so I can go, you know, I don't have to always go diagonal. I can do it you know, darker and darker. And once again, this isn't the best example of this because, you know, the sharp or the dry erase marker doesn't do this quite well, but if you give me just a second, I will also show you this in pencil as well, so on a different sheet, but so that you can see it a little better. Now, in addition to cross hatching, we also have what's known as contour hatching. And this is when we create hatched lines that follow the contours of an object. And this is especially good for rendering rounded objects. So in this sense, our hatched lines are going to curve around the form to help imply that roundedness, okay? And now we can also use the cross hatching with this as well to create, you know, more interest and more, you know, kind of dark passages and things like that. And we can even vary how they are, you know, kind of contouring around the edge there. And once again, that helps to create more physical, you know, kind of, or at least more of the illusion of physical depth. But this is also something that, you know, we can use, you know, in the creation of more complex objects. So let's say, you know, and once again, I apologize, this is going to be kind of crummy, but I'm just kind of drawing my hand based on how I'm looking at it holding my paper here. But let's say I've got my hand there. Well, I know that my hand is curving somewhat, so I can, you know, I can use the contour hatching to follow the curves of my hand as they come and create more illusionistic depth here and there. Now, once again, this isn't the best example. Obviously, it could be much better on paper and everything. But generally speaking, you know, I can use these kinds of contours to start implying the rounded quality of my arm, my forearm, etc. Okay, so this is another way that we can vary hatching and cross hatching to create more realistic kinds of illusionistic value ranges through simple line work. And so a good example of this would be if you have any paper money on you, look at the portrait on the paper money and you'll see contour hatching in all of those. So just another place that we can get a good example of that from. Now, as opposed to contour hatching, we also have what's known as stippling. And this is where we create the illusion of value through the massing of little dots. And so this is something, you know, if we had started with white, we could also start to really play up, you know, how we're, making it darker and darker. Obviously, at this point, we would pretty much have, you know, enough dots to make it look completely black. Once again, I'll show you another example of this on, paper with pencil here in a few minutes. So that's another way that we can go about the creation of value within a work of art through very simple means. Now, aside from that, once again, we have mass. And this, once again, refers to the physical bulk of a solid body material. So usually within the realm of drawing, what we're trying to create is the illusion of mass. So that's, you know, something there. Or the illusion of volume. And volume in this sense is when mass is encompassed by space. So the mass refers to the actual physical bulk of the object, whereas volume refers to the amount of space or volume that physical mass takes up. So within the confines of the rest of our space, so if this is our space, you know, the mass refers to not only the object that we're drawing, but also, you know, the volume itself refers to the physical space that mass takes up within the overall space of our composition. So once again, a lot of these words or terms can be used interchangeably, but they do kind of refer to one thing in particular. Now, in addition to that, we have space itself, which is the general kind of receptacle for all things. So, you know, this kind of emptiness around us, if you will, and everything like that, okay? So it's important to note that mass, volume, and space can all be kind of used interchangeably depending on the context. We could also use form, mass, and volume interchangeably, shape, mass, volume, form, all interchangeably as well. So it's can get a little complicated, but generally speaking, that's where we're at. Now, value in and of itself, once again, refers to the relative lightness or darkness of a surface. So, you know, is the surface, completely black, or is it, you know, is it kind of light gray? Is it dark? Is it white? You know, what have you. So pretty basic there as well. Now, the other thing that we can talk about is implied light. So this is, you know, when we perceive value as a relationship rather than an isolated form. So once again, depending on where we're at, you know, if we have a, you know, kind of dark form, a kind of gray form, and a light form, well, this kind of medium gray form is going to be perceived as much darker when compared to just the white form or the light form. And vice versa, the light form is going to be perceived in a much different way when it's right next to the super dark black form, okay? And so this is where this relationship or value relationship kind of comes into play. Sorry about that. But anyway, so once again, you know, we're usually going to perceive light colors or light values as being much lighter when compared to a dark color than when compared to a kind of medium or neutral color, and vice versa. So once again, implied light is another way that we can create this sense of realism within our drawings as well, because once again, we might not have a solid edge on something, so we might not perceive everything as having a hard black line around them, such as we see here. Well, it could be more or less that, it's not the hard edge line of the shape itself, but rather the background that's creating that hard edge line, or vice versa. Or likewise here, let's say, we had a light surface, but it's starting to kind of get darker, or at least shade somewhat. And then we've got like a pure shadow back here. Well, we might not necessarily perceive this line here as being a hard edged line. It might be more or less the difference between a kind of, light gray versus a darker gray, or a black, if you will. And then the only physical line that we might actually perceive would be the edges in the major highlight region and things like that. So once again, this can get kind of complicated as well. It just depends on what we're doing, and everything like this. This would also be where, objects fading into shadow and everything like that comes into play as well. Which brings us to chiaroscuro. And this is an Italian word. It literally means, light and dark. And so, chiaro means light, and oscuro means dark. But this is when we have a very violent contrast between light and dark. So, we have maybe one implied light source that's coming from off of our drawing, but, within the drawing itself, we have this really extreme, pronounced kind of version of shadow and everything. So, the entire background and what have you might be, completely black. As black as we can make it here. However, then, we have a kind of lighter tone and then a light tone. And so chiaroscuro would be the reference, or the kind of juxtaposition or strong contrast between our really dark negative space in the background and then the light reflecting across our major positive shapes in the foreground. And we'll get a little bit more into this when we start talking about composition as well. But, that is pretty much it for value in terms of our definitions. Once again, we'll talk a little bit more about this when we get into actually creating shaded value. But let me grab this pad really quick and show you just another form of everything that we've been talking about. So here we can see a series of value scales made in pencil and one in Sharpie. But in this sense, we can see hatching, cross hatching, regular shading, just kind of colored in shading, blended shading, as well as stippling. But we can also see how it works out in a kind of spherical realm as well. So in this sense, I've used graphite pencils that range from in our first square, we have just the plain color of the paper, and it might be a little hard to see right off the bat. But then I go from a 2H to a HB to a 2B, a 4B, 6B, 8B, 9B, and ebony pencil. But you can see that I press down the same, kind of with the same pressure across each of these, but we can see how the different pencils on our list can also represent deeper shadows. Once again, the 6B going up, we're starting to get into really soft graphite. So we have, very, kind of dark, solid marks. Same thing with the cross hatching. So in this sense, we have hatching, all of our lines are going one way. In this, we have cross hatching, but we have parallel lines each time. And each time I've pressed down the same, kind of weight on each of the pencils. So we can see a 2H is very hard graphite. It's very light. HB, same thing. But gradually as we get into the B series, we start to get darker and darker and darker. Now, likewise, with regular shading and blended shading, it's the same kind of deal. Once again, we have a value range going from light to dark. But once again, this is where we can perceive things. So let's take, say, the eraser here. Well, perceived next to the whiteness of the paper or the light quality of the paper, this seems much darker. However, when it's compared to the darker, kind of passage on the right here, it doesn't seem quite as dark. It actually seems a little lighter in that sense, and vice versa. So once again, this gets into how we perceive these values as a relation between one another. Now, likewise, down here at the bottom, we can see how stippling would work. So once again, we can see just the plain paper, and then we can see a massing of dots all the way up into the realm of black. Now, obviously, this could go even further and everything like that. But generally speaking, it's another way that we can go about creating the illusion of value within a drawing. But at the bottom here, we can also see 3 spheres that I've done, one with hatching, one with cross hatching, and one that I did it with cross hatching, but then blended it out, kind of similar to this guy down here. But we can see just how that would work. And so even using the different pencils, I can layer this up, and I just keep layering parallel lines up and getting darker and darker and darker until I have the deepest area down here at the bottom. Now, something else with the cross hatching here, we can see the same thing. So I'm getting darker and darker, using less and less of each of the pencils the darker I get. And I'm being more and more selective in those deep, dark areas. So, the dark ebony pencil is only really used in like the shadow here and maybe a few little places here and there. Same thing down here. It's really only used right about right here, and the rest of it is the rest of our value scale going up into our highlight here at the center. You can also see I've indicated where my light source is coming from in this sense as well. But once again, this is just basic breakdown of value. We'll talk a little bit more about it when we get into the actual shading of our drawings in that demo video and everything like that. But until then, thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.